Hey, this is Kirk, and here is something that I made. It is an Airtable base designed to help me learn how music theory works. If you're not familiar with Airtable, it is a really lightweight CRM tool kind of thing. One of my all-time favorite tools. It's a tool to help you build cool things, in my opinion. Now, this may not be interesting to everyone, but I think this stuff is so cool. And for someone like me with a lot of experience working with CRM, with Salesforce specifically, it is a very intuitive tool to help me put together my thoughts and the way things work together without having to write any code. So this specifically is a base around music theory. Music theory is what I'm really into right now. I've been playing music for about 13, 14 years or so now. And I read music, but I never really got how it all fits together. So I thought it would be a fun way to I thought it would be cool to build this to sort of show myself exactly how it all works. One thing to keep in mind is that I built this to help me learn. So if something's not right, I would love to hear about it. If you have any tips on how to put this together, or to improve it, or if I got something wrong when it comes to music theory, please let me know. I'm doing this to try to learn as much as I can. To get started, this is the notes table. Now, the table here is structured around, one record for each individual note. Not each individual pitch, but just one sort of note as a concept. Now, the core logic of how this whole thing fits together fits around lookup fields. So if I start to unhide some of these fields, you'll notice in almost all of these tables there are a ton of hidden fields, which are sort of the pipe work behind the scenes to make this all work. So this field corresponds to one semitone up. So what that means is it's a link to another record inside this table that is one semitone up. And so one semitone up from B is C, and two semitones up from B is D flat, etc., all the way up to 12. And what happens at 12, which is what makes this all work, is that it goes all the way up to B again. So what this means, after you put this all together, is that they are all interconnected. And once you get up to 12, it just starts over again, which is exactly how the pitches of the musical scale work. So if I hide all this, what I can do here is, using this information and how these notes fit together and the differences between, the numbers of semitones that are between these notes, etc., you can extrapolate that data, and Airtable is great at doing this, to all the rest of the information that you can get from the way, these sort of notes and scales and keys and chords and all that stuff fits together. So one more thing I wanted to show, and I'll get to how I did the major and minor scales and stuff later. One thing I want to show in the notes table is this view called the circle of fifths. These are the same records as here. They're just organized in a different way. And you'll notice that in all of these, I have a color associated. This is something that I put in recently to try and give myself a better and easier way to visualize all this information. The colors are roughly associated with the color wheel. So if you were to superimpose the color wheel on top of the circle of fifths, you would associate these colors here. The circle of fifths generally shows you what notes or what keys or what chords go together and sound well together. And so what I've tried to do is have these colors flow together in a way that so when I view notes at a glance, I can generally see what notes sound good together. Now, obviously, it's not an exact science, and I'm still trying to work out how best to work out this color thing. But it gives the bass a lot more life this way, and I really enjoy it. So going back to notes, one other thing I want to mention is that one of the things that I have not done yet is really implement going back and forth between sharps and flats. So for example, right now, this note here is called E flat. I have it here as an alternate name as D sharp, but you'll notice throughout the whole bass that it's referred to as E flat. These two pitches are exactly the same, but the notation changes in the context. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to learn as I go. I haven't implemented in the bass yet, but I will as I learn more about how these all work. Okay, so these notes all fit together, and what can you do with this? Well, the next thing I built was these scales. Now, scales and modes are sort of similar, but for now, let's just talk about scales. The way I've put these scales together is that I specify the steps between each note in the scale, all the way up to 7. Okay? So I just specify, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, which is the steps of the natural major scale. And there's a bunch of piping behind the scenes that show how that translate whole, whole, half into semitones. For example, this a whole is 2 semitones, and then it does some math to determine the consecutive how many semitones have passed at a given point in time. And putting that all aside, we can use this to generate keys. So if we look at the keys table, we can see that it is a junction or a combination of a note, the tonic, and a scale. And then when you combine these two, and it uses the logic presented here as whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, it will go through the scales, the notes of the scale. It does a bunch of math behind the scenes based on the number of semitones and the relationships between the notes to figure out which of these notes is next. So then you can see all these scales. Now, what's really cool about this, and the way it all fits together, is that I can simply add a new record whenever I want. So, for example, here in A, I can say A harmonic minor, A harmonic minor, and it will automatically find the right notes in the scale and then populate this multi-select pick list with the notes that are in the A harmonic minor scale. And if you're wondering how I did this, it is through Airtable automations. Now, Airtable automations are only available to Pro subscriptions, I think. So if you are interested, there's a link in the description below for that. But that the only thing that's necessary for a Pro subscription is the coloring, right? All of this can be done in other ways. And when I built it initially, I just had the notes like this, and then I built the coloring later. But I think the coloring adds so much to it. So in a similar vein as the scales and keys, I also built a system for chord types. So as I learn about different chords and how they fit together and what makes up a chord, I add it to my list of chord types that I know about. Each chord type has a notation, how these chords are specified. And this is just an example. It's just has an example note and the notation string, just to show me what it actually looks like here. It shows the functions of what notes make up the chord. And the crux of the logic, though, is made up by these intervals. Now, each chord is made up of a series of intervals, and which intervals are present determines the type of the chord. And now these intervals are set up in the intervals table. Each interval is fairly simple in that there isn't all that much data to it. Each interval has a function, whether it's the first, second, third, fourth, etc., and it is determined by the number of semitones there are between two notes. And it also has a name that's commonly referred to. For example, the minor second is also known as the flat second, and is notated this way. And that is where these functions come from. This list of functions here. If you look here, these functions, it's just a string that's being put together based on lookups to the function name. And also another thing to notice is that some intervals have the same number of semitones. The augmented fourth and the diminished fifth both have 6 semitones. They're the same thing, but they serve different purposes. They serve different functions and are used in different ways depending on what chord you're in, what key you're in, what scale you're in. This is the kind of thing that's so useful to build something like this, so that I can see how this all fits together. It's one thing to memorize or to just remember that the augmented fourth and the diminished fifth are the same. It's another thing to see it. You can see it very clearly that the number of semitones. In fact, what's cool about Airtable is that you can group things in different ways. Right now they're grouped by function, but if I group it by number of semitones, now I can see which ones are the same. The augmented fourth and diminished fifth, the minor sixth and augmented fifth. And there are tons of other intervals here that do that too, except I just haven't added them yet. As I learn about them, I'll add them. So what is so cool about this is, similar to the keys and scales, I can combine the intervals using some math behind the scenes, and the keys, the chord types and the intervals to make chords. And just like the keys, these chord records tell me what notes are in the chord based on what intervals are present. And I just think this is the coolest thing. So I can look at this, and if I want to know a different chord, I can just add it. So if we look at B flat, a B flat chord, we can say B flat. And then if based on the other chord types that I know, let's look at a 7th chord. I can just go to B flat, 7th, and it will tell me what notes are in the scale. I know that B flat, D, F, and A flat are all part of the B flat 7th chord. And that's the case because it includes the major third, the perfect fifth, and the minor 7th. And these here are just lookups to the interval fields on chord types. So just so it's easier to see here as you're analyzing different chords. And again, like I said before, these colorings just come from automations. So that is the core of this music theory base. I can go into more, nitty-gritty details of how it all works if you want. I'd be happy to do that, or even build it from scratch. And one of the things I've been using this base for is to learn my guitar fretboard. So this guitar table is it has a note, which is the open E string, right? Or the open strings. And then each fret is 1 semitone up. So it's fairly straightforward to use the lookup fields to correspond to each individual note. So now I can look at a grid. I can see the data right here of all the notes and how they fit together on the guitar fretboard. And because it's colored, it is really easy to see at a glance exactly where. So if I look at an F here, I can see that it's 2 up and 2 up. 2 strings up, 2 frets up, and here's the F. And the same for the G flat. These patterns are the same. Or another example, you can say, for those who play guitar, you might know E, A, D, G, B, E is the order of strings. But you see this pattern in other places, of course, because each note is only a half step up. So you see A, D, G right here. A, D, G. You'll always know, at least if you're in the first 3 strings, that A, D, G. They'll be in that order. All sorts of patterns you can see, and sometimes I just sort of stare at this and study it and try to learn the patterns because I really want to memorize all the notes on my fretboard and how it all works together. So this is a pet project I've been working on, and it's been really cool and really fun, and I'm learning a lot by doing it. And one of the things I want to do eventually is use this to help me write songs. So I haven't really built this out yet, but for example, I can analyze different songs based on their key and their chord progression, their feeling, and sort of connect all the notes and different things all together. Another thing I want to do is integrate with Reaper, which is a DAW that is used, or digital audio workstation that can be scripted, so I can use the Airtable API to connect those two things. I mentioned this earlier, but I want to make sure that I want to build in a system to convert E flat to D sharp and vice versa in the right context. I feel like there's probably a way to play the tones within Airtable. I can probably use some sort of programmatic system to do that. There's all sorts of different stuff that I want to build out of this while I'm still interested in this. And yeah, so I hope this was useful. I hope this was interesting. I will probably do more videos about Airtable basses that I've made in the future because I build these all the time. It's one of my absolute favorite tools, and it's a great way of learning. So yeah, thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions at all. I'd be happy to answer any of how this works or what other things I've done. So yeah, thanks.